All right, people, we're back. And so in the last video, just to recap, we covered most of Maya's. We covered the menu bar. We covered the shelf buttons up here, snapping and saving, and the some of the tabs here. And we covered these extra buttons as well, these tabs, and the transform tools, and so on and so forth. You watched the video, so you know what's going on. We also covered some of the attribute editor and channel blocks editor. So now what I want to do is talk about the heads-up display. So I went through, finding all the tools in the menu bar and the buttons here. But we're going to talk a little bit about the heads-up display. And so because we're doing that, I'd like to talk about some of the hotkeys in Maya and get you sort of familiarized with the hotkeys. And we'll also go through some of the viewport settings up here at some point. Okay, so when I say heads-up display, what do I mean? Maya has this really handy thing, which is called the heads-up display. And the way you access it is you hold down. So the first hotkey that I'm going to introduce you to is the space bar. So if I put my cursor anywhere on the screen. So if my cursor is in the middle of the screen, you can see it's in the middle of the screen, and I hold down the space bar, it brings up the heads-up display where the cursor is placed on the screen. Okay. If I put the cursor over here and hold the space bar, it brings up the heads-up display over where it is. So I'm going to put the cursor over here. I'm going to hold the space bar, and you can see that I've got this big heads-up display here. And what the heads-up display is this really handy-dandy thing that encompasses everything that Maya has. All the tools that Maya has, and all the tools you're going to need for modeling and anything else you want to do in Maya. So, if I hold the space bar, I can come up, I can save stuff. Okay, I can edit, I can create, I can select, modify, all that good stuff. So, I'm going to go ahead and create a polycube. Okay, so I have this polycube down here. Okay, and with this polycube, let's start playing around with some of the other hotkeys. So I mentioned that the heads-up display is accessed through holding the space bar. Okay, so that gives us the heads-up display, and we can do all the stuff that we need to model, add deformers, whatever, using the heads-up display. Now if I tap the space bar in any given viewport, so I'm in perspective view now, it's maximized. If I tap the space bar, it'll actually take me out of perspective view, and it'll go into our 4 views. So I've got top, front, side. And any one of these I can maximize by holding the cursor over top of it and tapping the space bar. So I can maximize the top view if I want by tapping the space bar. I can come down and put my cursor over the front view and tap the space bar to maximize it, and so on and so forth. So I can come in and I can maximize any one of these. So that's really handy. Okay. So let's go back to perspective view. And so that's tapping the space bar. Tapping the space bar maximizes the viewport. Okay, any given viewport with the cursor over top of it. The third hotkey I want you to know, and arguably the most important one, is the Alt key. So if I hold down the Alt key in combination with left click, right click, and middle mouse click, it will do a multitude of different things. So if I hold the Alt key holding the Alt key, and I left click and drag, it allows me to tumble around an object in my scene. Or if there's no object in the scene, it'll just tumble around the center of the screen. Okay. Since I have a cube here and I'm focused in on it, it's tumbling around that cube. Okay. So Alt and left click is tumble. Okay. So I can tumble in my viewport. Now if I hold the Alt key and middle mouse, that's pan. So panning is essentially the user moving up, down, right, left, right, in the screen, in the space, okay, in 3D space. So you are like an entity or whatever, and you're moving around in 3D space, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you can move up, or you can move down, you can move up, you can move left, you can move right. Okay. Okay, so now that's Alt and middle mouse, and that's pan. If I hold Alt and I right click and drag, that's zoom. So I'm zooming in 3D space and zooming out, zooming in, zooming out in 3D space in relation to an object. Or again, if there's no object in the scene, it'll just zoom in and out. Okay. So left click and Alt is tumble, to recap. Left click and middle mouse drag is pan. Alt and middle mouse is pan, pardon me. And Alt and right click is zoom. Okay. So the Alt key, it's your best friend. Always have one finger on the Alt key. I usually have my thumb switching between the left Alt key and the spacebar. Okay, so I can usually just have my thumb on the left Alt key, and then when I want to use the spacebar or tap the spacebar, access the spacebar, the HUD spacebar, I just sort of go between those two keys. Okay. Okay, so Alt should be really well known. The next hotkey I want you to learn is the focus key. So F for focus, which focuses in on an object. Okay. So if I have something selected, so I'm over here, you can notice that when I pan or tumble around, it doesn't tumble around that object. Why? Because I'm not focused in on that. So if I focus on it, I can tumble around that object. Okay. Because it's tumbling from the center of the screen. So if I'm off somewhere and I've got a cube here, I can hit the F key and it focuses in on that selected object, and then I can tumble around it. So you're not all disoriented. Okay. Okay, so F, focus. Now, how do we undo a command? So if I have the cube over here, I've moved the cube, and I say, well, I don't want the cube over there. And I could say, well, I want to undo that. I can simply hit the Z key or the Z key, depending on if you're from the States or Canada. The Z key is undo. Okay. Shift Z is redo. So Z, undo, Shift Z is redo. You can also say Control Z if you want. Control Z and Z do the same thing. They both undo. Shift Z redoes a command. Does a redo of the command. Okay. All right. So if I duplicate this cube, put that over there. If I hit the A key, it's zoom extents all, or view all. Okay. So if I got a bunch, if I have like a bunch of stuff in a scene, just gonna duplicate some of these cubes, and I hit the A key, it's gonna frame up all in the scene. So A is framing up all. Okay. And if I want to focus in on one or two objects, I can select two of them and say F. select 2. Anything that's selected, I say F, and there you go. You're focusing on those. And then I can hit A, focus on all of the objects. Okay. So the A key, F key, fun stuff. All right. Okay. Now, how about if I want to repeat a command? Not necessarily redo a command, but say I duplicate a cube. Okay. Well, that was the duplicate command. So I've copied a cube and placed it over there. What if I want to do the same command? What if I just want to repeat what I did last? Well, I can select the cube and I can say G. Okay, well I guess pardon me, it repeated the command for the last cube, but it's still duplicated. It's the thing to take away from this is it repeated the last command that I did. Okay, so the G key will repeat what you last did. Okay, if I were to, where are we here? If I were to create a joint, okay, so I've drawn a joint here, and then I say, well, I wanna create another joint, but I don't want to have to go back into, you know, heads up display, go to skeleton, create joints. I can just hit G, and it will go back into the create joints tool to repeat that last command. Okay, so the G key is repeat command. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to delete some of these cubes here. Go back to this guy. I'll hit F to focus in. Tumble around. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my outliner by going to Windows, Outliner. Okay, so this is my outliner. And an outliner, as I mentioned in the previous video, is a list of objects in your scene. So you can see I've got one P cube here, and there it is, my trusty polycube. All right. So if I don't want to be viewing this in the scene, I can say Control and H to hide the object. And you can see over in the outliner that P cube 1 has been grayed out, so it's hidden. If I want to bring it back, I can just click the P cube 1 and say Shift H to be able to view it again. Okay. So if your outliner is not open and you hide something, you can bring it back by going to Display, Show, Last Hidden. Okay. But I suggest that you always have your outliner open anyway, because it's very good practice. Your outliner is like your best friend when you're, especially when you're a modeler or any kind of 3D artist, because it's essentially, you know, this is a way of seeing what's in your scene. If you can't see the list of stuff that's in your scene, it's kind of like working blind. So it's very important to have your outliner open and to be able to view it. Some people have two monitors at home. I do. And sometimes, you know, people will put their outliner on the other monitor over on the other side. So always have your outliner open. So Control H and Shift H. Control H to hide. Okay, so I can select it here and say Control H, and then I can say Shift H to bring it back. Okay. Okay, so hiding objects. All right, so now let's get into something that's very important. And some people might even argue that this might have been the first thing that I should have touched on, but I didn't. That's okay. Memorization is memorization, but I really want you guys to learn what some people like to call the QWERTY keys. The four main keys I really want you to focus on are the Q, W, E, and R keys. And those are going to be your shortcuts for your transform keys. So we went through transform commands up here. We have the select tool, we have the moves, the rotations, and the scales. Okay, so those are your transforms. Those are transforms. Okay, so if I want to just select something, I'm going to hit the Q key. Okay, so right now I'm in selection mode. So you can tell I'm in selection mode because my cursor is just an arrow. But if I hit the W key, you can see my cursor turns into an arrow with a box, and that means that I can grab this and I can actually move an object. I can move it on its X axis, I can move it on its Z axis, and I can move it on its Y axis. Okay, and that's the W key, that's move. If I hit the Q key again, it just allows me to select or deselect objects by clicking outside or inside them. Okay. Now if I want to rotate an object, the E key is rotate. So I can rotate it on the X axis, I can rotate it on the Y axis, and you guessed it, I can rotate it on the Z axis. And if I click in the middle of the rotation gizmo here, it'll actually rotate it on all three axes like that. Okay, you can sort of tumble it. Right. Now comes the R key, which is, you guessed it, scaling. So scaling, I can scale it uniformly by clicking the center box, the yellow box there. I can scale it on the X, I can scale it on the Z, and on the Y. Okay. So those four keys, know them, make them your best friend. Really, really important for us in this course, along with the others I've already taught you. Okay. Now let's talk about the snapping function keys. So snapping, can't stress this enough, another really important topic. Okay, so what is snapping? Snapping is you are taking one object and placing it up against another object, or I guess a better way to say that is aligning it with a piece of another object or a component of another object. We'll get into components of objects in the next video. We're not going to talk about those right now. I'll touch on them just for the sake of explaining the snapping functions. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say shading, and I'm going to view the wireframe on the shaded objects. And maybe I'll turn off my grid here. So I have this cube. Okay. And what I can do actually is I'll create a sphere. So I have a polysphere here. So here's my polysphere. Now, every object has a pivot. So a pivot is the point at which the object moves, scales, or rotates from. When you create an object in Maya or any 3D software, the pivot is usually centered on the object. So I have a pivot that's centered on the cube, and if I go to unshaded mode, you can see that that pivot is right in the middle. Same for the sphere here. The pivot is right in the middle of the sphere. Okay. So what I can do is, while I'm modeling, I may want parts of the object to be aligned with other parts of another object. So if I wanted to, and that the way that works is it always aligns the pivot of one object or an object's component to the point of another object, the point of another object. You could align it to the grid, you could align it to an edge. Okay, and so I'm going to show you how to do this. So we're going to talk about three kinds of snapping, three main kinds of snapping: point snapping, grid snapping, and curve snapping. Okay, and we'll leave it at that for now. So if I grab this sphere and I go to the move tool, I know that my pivot is in the middle of the sphere, which means I can snap this sphere's pivot to, let's say, a point on the cube. So a point, if I go to vertex mode of this cube, you can see that this cube has these little points. Those are called vertices. Okay, and I can actually snap the pivot of this sphere to those points by using point snapping. So the way to do that is I can hold the V key, okay, and you can see that when I hold the V key up here, this little magnet icon with the dot gets highlighted, and that means that point snapping is activated by holding that. And if I just middle mouse drag over top of one of these corners where the vertices are, it will snap my sphere's pivot to that point. So if I'm holding V and I middle mouse drag over top of any one of these points or close to one of these, it will snap the sphere to that point. Make sense? Okay. Now let's talk about curve snapping. Curve snapping is a way to snap the pivot of an object to another object's curve or edge. Okay, so in the case of if you have a line like a CV curve, you can snap an object to that CV curve. So to demonstrate this, I can actually go into curve. So let's draw a little curve there, and I'm going to hold the C key and middle mouse drag, and you can see that the pivot of my sphere is following along that curve by holding the C key. So it's perfectly aligned to that curve. I can also curve snap to an object's edges. Okay, so if I hold the C key and middle mouse drag over the cube's edges, you can see that I can drag it along the cube's edge like that. Okay, so that's curve snapping. Also important for some situations in 3D modeling. Now let's bring back the grid. I'm going to go up here, just click on this little icon up here. It says grid. So I have the grid here. I can also hold the X key to snap an object's pivot to the grid. Okay. You can see the sphere moving along the grid like that. And same goes for, if you're trying to align an object in the side view on the grid. Okay, go to the move tool and hold the X key, and I'm snapping along the grid. Okay. All right. So very good. Snapping functions. Okay. So now the next thing I want to cover a little bit is just some of the viewport settings. Okay, so if I come over here, let's just take a look at these tabs up here. So under View, we have a bunch of different things. We can select the camera that we're viewing through. I'm just going to mention the pertinent ones to you, the important viewport settings here to you, what you're going to need them for. So when I said select camera, it's now selected the perspective view, which is what I'm looking through. So select camera, okay. All right. And also, I can select it. Okay, so I have this camera selected. So in the event that I actually wanted to, let's say, put a keyframe on the perspective camera, and sometimes that's useful when you want to lock I wouldn't suggest you do it with the perspective view. I would suggest you use it, uh, you know, with an actual camera. So if I were to go in and say go to cameras and create a camera, so I have this camera here, okay, and just for argument's sake, I'm gonna change my view to the camera view, so I can see I'm in my camera. So this is my camera. And say I wanted to model from this camera, and I didn't want the camera to move. Well, I could say view, select the camera, which is what it's going to do is it's going to select whatever I'm looking through. So view, select camera. I can actually, with that camera selected, I can hit the S key on frame 1 to put a keyframe on that camera. So in the event that I accidentally move the camera, and then I just scrub through the timeline like this a little bit, it pops the camera back into place. So just an FYI, it's a nice little handy dandy function. So when you go to view, you select your camera, and then you hit the S key on frame 1 or whatever frame you want, you can sort of lock your camera in place. So that's view, select camera, okay? And that's if you have a camera created, okay? And again, that actually brings me to another one under view, which is camera settings. You're going to want to memorize resolution gate, okay? So just if we're ever looking through a camera, you want to be looking at it through the resolution gate. So the resolution of your camera is 960 by 540, okay, which is it's one below half HD. Okay, it's HD 540, and then there's HD 720 and HD 1080 or 1920 by 1080. Okay, but we can see our resolution here, and it says camera 1. So we always want to be viewing the camera through the resolution gate. So this doesn't give me much information if I turn off resolution gate. Okay, so you can also access turning on and off resolution gate by going to this little circle with the box around it here. It says resolution gate, and it's 2 over from the grid. You can click that, and it'll actually show you what you're viewing in the viewport. So it puts a frame around everything. So that's really important to look through resolution gate when you have a camera open, because you don't know what you're looking at unless you do that. You don't know what you're framing up in your scene. Okay, so just be cognizant of that. View, select camera, so we can select our camera that we're working through, and then view, camera settings, resolution gate. And you can see right now it's set to no gate. Okay, so resolution gate. Okay. Other things we don't need to know right now. Shading, very important. So right now you can see that in my viewport I have these objects. You can see the shading on them, the wireframe. Okay, you can see the wireframe, not the shading. You can see the wireframe on them. So that's also really important with modeling, is being able to view things in different ways, which is going to bring me to a couple of other hotkeys in a minute. But I just wanted to go through some of these viewport menu buttons. So I just want to talk about shading for a second here. We can say if we want to view things in wireframe, we can do it either through here by clicking wireframe. Okay. We can view smooth shaded all. Okay. So that's going to put shading on everything. We're going to see the surfaces. Smooth shade selected items. So if I say that, only the objects that I click are going to be shaded. Makes sense. Flat shade all just means it's going to put flat shading on it. Flat shade selected items. Okay. Now usually what flat shade means is you're not going to see the wireframe. But since we have view wireframe on shaded on, Okay, view wireframe on shaded was on. I've now turned it off, but since it's not on anymore, now it's just flat shading everything. You can see. Okay, so I can't see the wireframe. Okay, and then there's bounding box. So bounding box is nice if you have a heavy scene and you don't want to be calculating. So you can see that it actually turned my sphere into a box, so that it's using Maya's now using less RAM, less information, less data to view what's in your scene. So if you have a really big scene with a lot of objects in it and you're animating, you can sort of go to bounding box and it'll just show you the basic. Okay, it's basically telling you, okay, there is something here, but we don't want to view all of the geometry on it because it's bogging down our scene. Okay, so I'm going to go back to shaded mode here. Now if I come down here, if I say use default material, it's just going to take all the materials in Maya's scene and change it back to the default material. So it is what it sounds like. But I just want to demonstrate this. I'm going to assign a blend to this, and I'm going to assign a Lambert to this. So it says view default material, or use default material. So you can see that this ball has a little bit of shine on it. That's because I put a blend material on it. But if I come to shading and I say use default material, it's going to go back to Maya's base Lambert material, which is just a matte material. So when I click this, it gets rid of the shading. Okay, simple enough. So if we have a scene with a lot of really complicated materials and we don't want to view those, we can say use default material, and it'll just take all the objects and put this gray shaded material on it. Wireframe on shaded is an extremely important one, and I want you guys to pay attention to this one big time. So wireframe on shaded allows us to view the wireframe on top of our object. So when we're modeling, this is really important because we want to see that topology, we want to see the edge flow and how the edges are working, you know. So that's really important. We can say X-ray, which is nice if we're modeling something in a viewport using IBM or image-based modeling techniques, which we will cover not today, but later on. Okay. And for now, that's pretty much it. Under shading, I want you to pay attention to those ones. Okay. So lighting, we're not going to cover this right now because I'm going to introduce you to some hotkeys. If we go to view lighting, and so we'll cover that in a little bit, in just a minute. If I go to show allows me to literally pick and choose what I show in my viewport. So if I have locators, joints, you know, any kind of geometry deformer or locator or null object or DAG object, I can really pick and choose what I want to see. So I mean, as a rigger, you know, very often I would be like quite often running into situations where, you know, I've got like joints running through meshes like this, and you know, it's really complicated to see things. But if I say, okay, well, I've already rigged the character and I'm just performing with it, and I don't really want to see that anymore while I'm testing the rig out and trying to break the rig, I can just say, okay, well, I want to turn off my joints. So where are my joints? Okay, so I turned that off. So I can't view joints in the viewport anymore. So this is sort of allows you to see, pick and choose what you can isolate in the viewport or view in the viewport. Okay, so if I want to bring my joints back and be able to view them, I can just click it. I can say none to show none, and I can show all. Okay, it just allows me to, you know, is what it sounds like. Show. Well, what do I want to show? Okay. Under renderer, we have three types or three ways to view things. We can use viewport 2.0, which is usually a pretty good way to view stuff in your viewport. We can go to high quality, which shows lighting and shadows, and we can go to legacy default. So legacy default isn't probably what you want to use. I'd say just leave it on viewport 2.0 because it gives you a sort of in-between of the quality of things. But again, this is just a way to pick and choose the quality of how you want to look at something in the viewport. If you want to see your textures really, really well, you might want to go to high quality viewport, especially when you're doing texturing and shading. So we're going to be kind of dabbling with that. So just keep that in mind. Be cognizant of it when you're putting shaders on your objects. Legacy high quality viewport might be a way to check your UVs a little bit better because you'll see that checker map on it, which I will give you guys in this course. Checker texture to lay out your UVs and make sure that they're not stretching or whatever. Now under panels. So panels is an interesting one. We can say a few different things. The ones I really want you to pay attention to for right now are perspective. So if, for instance, I get out of this, okay, so you can see right now at the bottom of the screen it says camera 1. So that means that what I was using for my perspective view, I'm now using for my camera view. Well, what if I don't want to be using this viewport for my camera? What if I want to say, well, I want to go back to my perspective view. I don't want to tie up this viewport with my camera. I can go to Panels, Perspective, and then I can say Perspective. So I have two options here. Because I have a camera created, I have a camera 1 here, which I can look through on this panel, and I can also look through perspective view. So I'll click perspective, and you can see that it changes it back to perspective view. And if I maximize this window, there's the perspective view that I'm looking through, and we can see that there's our camera. So our camera's right here, right? So that makes sense. Okay. And I can come and I can work with my camera. I can move it over here. Now since my camera's keyed, if I scrub it, if I scrub the timeline, it'll pop back into place, which is kind of what we wanted anyway. We wanted to lock that camera in place. So again, we're back in perspective view, and I can tap the space bar to see what's going on in my other views, just like normal. So here's my camera in the top view. Okay. All right. So panels, perspective. Now, the other one I want to just touch on is the look through selected. Look through selected option. So I can actually look through any any object. I can actually look through an object. So I'm actually looking through my sphere from the pivot of the sphere. I can look through the camera. Now I wouldn't suggest doing that. I would never ever suggest doing that, but I'm just saying you can look through anything. Usually what this is used for is looking through lights and cameras. So if I select my camera over, or sorry, it would be in this viewport. If I go to panels, look through selected, oh, I select my camera, panels, look through selected. Now I'm looking through my camera view over here. I can even look through a joint. So I'll select this joint, and under panels on this guy, I'll say look through selected. Oh, okay, apparently you can't look through a joint. I was wrong about that. Okay, so an object you can look through, so cubes. Okay, so like I said, it's Maya. This is exactly this is exactly the point I was trying to make. I don't know everything. Sometimes I do make mistakes. So yeah, you can't look through joints. Okay, that's the takeaway from that. But again, basically we can look through objects. Cameras we can look through. um, and lights. But lights and cameras, those are the two main ones you want to really focus on. So just to demonstrate the way looking through a light is very useful is if I go to create and let's say spotlight, I create a spotlight here, and I want to make sure that that light is shining directly on objects. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to create a plane here. So we can see that I have this light shining. On these objects here. But a really cool way to sort of position your light is if I want to use this viewport to do that, I can go to Panels, Look Through Selected. So I'm actually looking through the light. Okay, so the light is it's rotated kind of weird, so I have to tumble around a little bit. I have to tumble around a little bit to get it to work properly. But you can see that I can actually, okay, I'm going to rotate it like this on the Z-axis to get it upright. But I can pan around using the light. Okay, so that's kind of cool. And in this viewport, I can see how that light is sort of looking. Okay, so I'm shining the light down. I'm looking at it through here, and I'm positioning the light through the looking glass here, as you would say. So you're kind of wondering, I've been switching like shading modes here, but I haven't really been clicking things. So in case you're wondering why I haven't been clicking around stuff to switch through shading modes, it's because there are hotkeys for that. Okay. So those are the last hotkeys that I want to talk about. Okay. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, so I apologize for that. But just to go back to hotkeys, add a couple of hotkeys to your repertoire here. So up on your keyboard. Sorry, I'm just gonna change my viewport back to perspective here. On your keyboard, if we hit the 4 key, 4 key views everything as wireframe. Okay. So we're getting really confused and we don't know what's going on. We say, oh God, I can't see what's going on because there's too much wireframe or not enough. The 4 and the 5 keys are actually what toggle between shaded mode and wireframe viewing mode. So the 4 is for wireframe, 5 is shaded. Okay. 4, 5, 4, 5. So I'm just sort of toggling between these two, and you can see that up here these two buttons do the same thing. So wireframe, smooth shade all. So 4 and 5. What about 6? Well, 6 displays textures. So if I have some kind of texture on my objects, okay, so I'm going to go to material attributes here, and under color I'm just going to throw a checker texture on this. If I hit the 5 key and the 6 key, so 5 is shaded, 6 is viewing textures as well. So I can view my textures by hitting the 6 key. Okay. So 6, 5, 6, 5, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6. Make sense? Okay. So let's go to shaded mode here. Now, the 7 key is to be able to view my lighting. So if I have a light in the scene and I hit the 7 key, it's going to show what the lighting looks like. Okay. And there you go. So 7 shows the lighting. So up here, beside use all lights, okay, which is the 7 key, there's another button called shadows. And if I click that, what it allows me to view is an object's cast shadows. Okay. Okay. So not the contact shadows, but the cast shadows. Contact shadows are the shadows that are on the object's surface. Cast shadows are the objects shadows that are being cast onto other objects. So this is my box, or my cube's cast shadow here that I can view. Okay, and that's just beside this little light bulb. Use all lights. I can click that. Okay. So that's it. That's all I really want to teach you. Oh, one more thing. Make sure that you remember that to view your grid, it's this button here. This little button right underneath the Show menu, Grid. Okay, so I can click my grid off and on. Okay, that's usually how I access it. Okay. Okay, so great. We're going to stop the video here. We've learned pretty much all of the hotkeys we need to know. So again, remember your 4 key. Let me turn off. Okay, so for viewing, remember your 4 key, your 5 key. So 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is textures, 7 is lights. Okay. Okay. So remember those. Those are your last hotkeys I want you to know. So we've gone through in this video, this is quite an extensive video actually, but we've gone through most of the hotkeys that you need to know, if not all of them. There will be a couple that pop up in some later videos, but I didn't want to bog you down with them. You've already learned enough. But most of the very important hotkeys have been covered. Hopefully you've been taking notes. And we've also covered the snapping hotkeys, and we've gone through the viewport settings here. So in the next video, we're going to get into discussing objects and their components. So what is a 3D object made up of? What is 3D geometry, and how is it generated? So we're going to talk about that in the next video, amongst other things. Thank you for watching, and I will see you then. Ta-ta for now.